Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a conversation with Nita Tyndall and Amber Smith. My name is Talia, and I'm the events manager here at Flyleaf. Before I introduce Nita and Amber, I'd love to give y'all a quick overview of our virtual events calendar. It took us a while to figure out how to do virtual events, but now we've got a pretty steady lineup through the fall. This season, we've already hosted authors including Jill McCorkle and Frances Mays, Ron Rash, and Jean Nickel. If you missed any events you were planning to watch, you can find the recordings either on our Facebook page or here on our Crowdcast profile. And we also encourage you to go ahead and click on the Flyleaf Books logo at some point, either during or after this conversation, to see the full lineup of events through the fall. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, please keep in mind that Nita and Amber's books are available for purchase. We have another shipment of Who I Was With Her coming hopefully tomorrow.
No,
but we
I'm
have
still
some shipping issues.
Here.
And Nita has agreed graciously to stop by the store again over the weekend and sign more copies.
Can you hear me?
You can order those by clicking the buy button beneath our faces. Or you can call Flyleaf tomorrow to order over the phone. Also, if you feel inclined to donate a few dollars to help Flyleaf continue programming, there is a donate button at the bottom of the screen. Without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce Amber and Nita. Amber grew up in Buffalo, New York, and now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with her partner and their ever-growing family of rescued dogs and cats. Amber has a background in painting and art history. And when she's not writing, she makes art and works as an art consultant. Amber is an advocate for awareness of gendered violence and LGBTQ issues. She is the New York Times bestselling author of young adult novels The Way I Used to Be, The Last to Let Go, and Something Like Gravity. And our star tonight, celebrating their debut launch event, is Nita Tyndall. Nita Tyndall is a passionate queer advocate and literary translator who writes the kinds of books they needed in high school. Their translations from the German have appeared in World Literature Today, and they have previously written for outlets like Autostraddle and were part of the Lambda Literary Writers Retreat in 2017. They live in North Carolina with their partner and a beautifully fluffy cat. Nita's debut young adult novel, Who I Was With Her, tackles issues of grief, sexuality, and identity. It is a quiet, compelling exploration of coming out in the South, being okay with not knowing exactly what the future holds, and navigating relationships with friends, family, and the folks who are left behind when someone they all loved passes away. We are so excited to welcome local author Nita Tyndall to Flyleaf tonight. I'm going to pop out so y'all can chat, and then I will come back to moderate the Q&A in just a bit. Thank you so much, Nita and Amber.
All right, so I am ready when you are, Amber, if you want to go ahead. Also, hi, everybody. We're having a bit of lag with the audio. I can't hear you. Yep, I can see you and I can see your video and I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear the audio.
Amber, if you don't mind, I am going to close your video, and why don't you log back on and I will reshare your video. And in the meantime, I can go ahead and ask Nita a couple questions to get us started. Okay, thank you so much for bearing with us, everyone. Okay, let's see. So let's go ahead and just get started with a question about Who I Was With Her. What inspired you to write this book?
So I actually started writing this back in 2015, and I knew that I really wanted to tell a story about a queer girl specifically, because at the time the YA landscape, books about queer girls was not very broad. So I knew I wanted to tell that story. I wanted to tell a story about a girl who was bisexual because that wasn't really represented at the time either. And I had that first line in my head, like when I started writing, which is when I hear that she's dead, I run. And I was like, oh, what is the story behind this? And then as the book grew, to me, I really wanted to like explore that concept of grieving someone when you are still in the closet and when no one else knows about your relationship, because to me that was a very compelling like aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very heartbreaking one. I was reading some reviews on Goodreads and things, and people are saying, you know, I was crying just from the synopsis, which I can understand.
I've been trying to avoid Goodreads, but the feedback that I've like gotten from people is that it's been a lot of tears, which was my goal. So you know what? I'm totally happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a bad thing to make people cry with your book.
No.
At all. How do you balance the hard topics like grief and coming out with lighter elements in your book to prevent it from becoming too dark?
Mm-hmm. That was something that I wanted to be really conscious of because it is such a sad topic. So for me, the thing that was important is the book is told non-linearly, so it switches between past and present. And I wanted to show in the past, actually, the two characters, Maggie and Corinne, I wanted to show their relationship. I wanted to show those moments of them being together, of them being happy, to one, give the reader the sense of who Maggie actually was, since when you meet her on page 1, she is dead. And to lighten up those moments of the rest of the book that are so filled with grief and loss.
Yeah. So would you say that some of the reason for the nonlinear storytelling is to intersperse those lighter moments throughout a somewhat dark
Yes, absolutely.
story?
Absolutely. Yep. Because I wanted to.
Was it difficult to? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, because I wanted, like, for me, it was very important to show Maggie as a character as well, and not just have like Corinne talk about her, but actually show what their relationship was like while Corinne is experiencing it.
Right. Did you write the past narrative and the present narrative separately, or did you write them sort of interweaving as you were going?
I actually wrote them interweaving as I was going, because when I was doing my first draft, that was how it unfolded. But when I went back and was revising the novel, I put all of the flashbacks and all the past tense in its own little separate document, so I could go through and make sure that the story that those told were complete before I started like chunking them up and placing them in between the present narrative.
Right. That makes sense. I would think it would be a little bit difficult to keep track of where the plot is in the different timelines.
Yeah, I had to bust out the Google Calendar and make sure that all my scenes were actually when they were supposed to be taking place, which my poor copy editor did a very good job of making sure, like, okay, you said this was on a Wednesday, but it's actually supposed to be on a Tuesday.
Wow, yeah, that would be a hard job to be the person to come in and just make sure everything's lining up. Who would you say is your favorite character in the book?
Oh, that's hard.
I know it's like picking your favorite child.
Favorite child. It probably would have to be my main character, Corinne. Mostly because I was in her head the entire book, and because she is, to me, she was such a compelling character to write, because she is so angry and she is grieving and she is lost, and she's honestly at times she's not very nice. She's not a good friend, and I wanted to really write that, and I really enjoyed writing her because of that, because we don't get to allow girls that anger a lot. So I wanted to have a character who was at times unlikable, who was frustrating, who does not always make the best choices. Right.
I think I've at least in the letter from the author at the front of the advanced copy, I know you talked about writing a character who's not always likable. And it's clear that that is a very intentional choice on your part. How would you respond to readers who have difficulty accepting sort of a slightly unlikable protagonist, or at times unlikable?
I mean, I had a time writing her because she was unlikable, so it's completely understandable for that as a reader. So it's actually fine to me when readers are like, "Oh, I didn't like Corinne." I'm like, "Great. Sometimes you're really not supposed to."
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you like all your characters? Or is there another character you identify with more?
I think I kind of identify with Karim. I don't think I was as angry as she was in high school. I probably mostly would identify with, if we're talking about like which character is most like me, I would identify more with her best friend Julia, who tends to be quieter, kind of like knows what she wanted from her future. And Julia has her own coming out story in the book as well. She realizes that she's asexual, so which is an identity I had at the time. So I was like, okay, yes, this is the character I'm more identify with than Corinne.
Right, that makes sense. Sorry, 1 second. I just need to plug in my
You're
computer.
fine.
You can keep talking.
Yes, but none of the characters in the book are like me specifically. They all have kind of like aspects of me, but they're not. Right. There's no like one character where I'm like, yes, this is my entire personality.
Right, I think that makes sense. Do you feel like, I know you grew up in the South. Were you inspired by other people you were interacting with as a teenager? Is that because all of the other high school characters feel so fleshed out?
Yeah, yeah, definitely drew on my own high school experience for that one. I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in a very small town outside of Raleigh. So I definitely, when I was initially writing the book, mined a lot of my own high school experience for the characters in there. Especially because when I was in high school, I absolutely had that, oh, I'm not like other girls mentality. And I wanted to write a girl who was kind of the girls that I thought I was not like. So someone who was quote unquote girly, who was into makeup, who was like very stereotypically feminine, because those were the girls I knew in high school and the girls that I didn't like that much. So I was like, I want to write from that perspective. And then everyone else, I just kind of, the other characters I did just kind of based on like, they're not based on any singular people in my high school, though I did steal some of their names. But no one from my
the other way around.
No one from my high school is going to read this and be like, oh man, that's me. Like the two exceptions are actually, there's two girls that Corinne meets when she goes to her college visit named Saneha and Olivia. And those are my best friends from college. They're also Saneha and Olivia. So I told them, I was like, I'm just putting you guys in this book and you can deal with it.
That's a great touch. All right, let's see. Okay. What books did you grow up reading? Speaking of your younger years.
I grew up reading actually a lot of contemporary YA, which is why I wanted to do this one. I read a lot of Laurie Halse Anderson when I was in high school. Speak was the first book that I read, and I was like, oh, I want to write like this. This is an author who, like, this is what I want to be. So I read a lot of her. I read a lot of Sarah Dessen, because you can't be a teenager in North Carolina and not read a lot of Sarah Dessen at some point.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I read so much Sarah Dessen. And then I would like occasionally sneak queer books from the library. So I'd read like Melinda Lowe or Julianne Peters. Would read some of those because I was like, oh, queer stories. I can hide in the library and read these and not bring them home so my parents find out about them. So mainly it was a lot of contemporary YA for me.
Have you met Sarah since living in North Carolina as an adult?
I have not met Sarah as an adult. I would very much like to. I met her like I think once or twice when I was in college, and actually came to some events that she did here. And I think I met her after I signed with my agent at some point, like at a Flyleaf event. But I've not met her since like the book deal. Being an adult.
She is so lovely, and she's here all the time. So yeah, you'll definitely have your Sarah moments.
Yeah, 14-year-old me would be freaking out right now.
I know. The first time I met her was when I started working here. I like flipped. So as you are a published author now, congratulations. What advice would you give to other aspiring writers?
Okay. Wow. So I think just kind of realizing that not everything is going to happen at once with publishing, and that it is, if you're in it, you're going to be in it for the long haul. With regards to like publishing as a business, it takes a lot more waiting than I anticipated, and I'm not a very patient person. But as far as the actual writing goes, I think the thing that I always do is like my first drafts are for for me. They're not for like my agent, they're not for my editor. They're like maybe occasionally for critique partners or for people to give criticism, but in the beginning it's very important to me to write that story that I want to tell and write it for myself, because I can always go back and change it or add it later or make it better from that feedback. But that's the reason I wanted to be a writer, and the reason I got into publishing in the beginning was because I just loved writing and I love telling stories. So that was it for me. Also the realization that sometimes like things aren't going to happen the way you want them to, the time you want them to. I wrote this book 5 years ago and it sold last year, and in between that, like I had another book, my first book I wrote didn't sell. I had switched agents. And so like it is a long process, and it's not always a very linear process, but just realizing that like if this book doesn't work, I can write something else. Like I am still capable of doing something else, even if the first one doesn't like work out.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about what it has been like to have a book come out during the pandemic? Because it's a unique experience, I'm sure.
It is extremely unique. It has been very surreal in that like it didn't feel real until maybe a week before Tuesday. And then I was like, oh, my book is actually coming out. Because when I had, last year when we sold the book, when I thought about what debuting was going to be like, I was like, cool, I'm going to get to go to events. I'm going to get to go to like Book Expo in New York. I'm going to meet a bunch of people and like see people who I've been interacting with online. Obviously that did not happen. So it was a lot. Up until last week, I was just like, I feel like I'm just checking emails that are like, hey, your book's coming out next week. And I'm like, yes, great. That doesn't feel real to me right now. So it's been a very fun and kind of surreal process. But now that it's actually out in the world, I'm like, okay, yes, I do have a real book out. This is like an actual thing that people can purchase online or wherever. And it finally did kind of sink in, and it's actually been very exciting. Like since last week, I was like, oh, I have a book out in the world. It's really cool. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And there's something about, of course, like holding it in your hands that, it like all clicks at that moment. And hopefully folks who have not been able to be in a bookstore will be able to have that physical experience soon. Flyleaf is potentially going to open next month for browsing, so we're excited to again, and hopefully we can continue to work with you or have you come sign books or meet folks at some point, because I think that would be wonderful for our community.
I would love that.
Speaking of the publishing experience, what was the process like for designing the cover, or who designed it? What input did you have?
Yeah, so I got the cover. I got initial input on who I wanted the artist to be back in July of last year. My editor emailed me 3 different artists with like not mock-ups of my cover, but just like their general styles, and was like, which style do you like best? Which do you think is going to fit for the book? So I picked the artist. His name is Max Reed. I was like, oh, I really like his art. And then about 2 months later, I got the email from Harper with, hey, this is the idea we have for your cover. What do you think of it? And it was actually essentially it was this cover pretty much, with a couple different font options for the title. And so I gotta have my final say on like, this is the title font that I like, knowing of course like marketing might have their own opinion, and weirdly we need
they always do.
We need a Barnes and Noble's approval at some point for some reason, because they have a lot of say in your cover design. I don't quite know why, but so that was it. But I'm very fortunate with that cover. It is a beautiful cover, and the first moment I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Like, it's very pink, it stands out on a shelf, and also the detail that I loved when I saw it is Corinne is wearing the lime green scrunchie that used to be Maggie's, and the fact that they got that detail and put it on the cover was really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I kept flipping back to the cover as I was reading and thinking, oh, like there it is right there on the cover. For folks who maybe haven't started reading yet, or may not have the clearest idea of the plot of Who I Was with Her, can you give just a brief sort of like pitch for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So Who I Was With Her is about a 17-year-old girl named Corinne, and she runs cross country, and she is secretly dating the captain of the rival cross country team named Maggie. Sorry. Maggie dies unexpectedly at the start of the book, and then Corinne has to figure out how to grieve her without anybody knowing that they were dating, except for Maggie's brother, Dylan. And Maggie's brother introduces Corinne to Maggie's ex, Alyssa, who ends up being the only person that Corinne can turn to, and that she actually kind of starts falling for a little bit.
Great. Yeah, it's such a compelling story because you have these relationships that you're just not sure how they're going to work out at all, and this underlying level of, you know, everybody's going through such a tough circumstance that everyone's emotions are like on 100, which makes for just the most compelling reading. I was wondering if you could go ahead and read a brief excerpt. Do you have one handy?
I do. Yep, I have that picked out. It is an actual book in front of me. It's about 4 pages, I think. So I'll go ahead and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the book, so I think, like we mentioned before, the book is in a nonlinear timeline. So it starts with the day of Maggie's death and then flips back and forth between a couple months up to a year before Maggie died, when Corinne and she started their relationship, and then one day after, 2 days after, when Maggie is actually dead. So this is from 2 days after. I was out with Julia, I call to Dad as I come in the door, hurrying up the stairs before he can even ask me how Julia's doing. I toss my dress off and it lands on Bish, who meows in protest before hurrying under my bed. I lie down and pull out my phone, open it to Instagram, to Maggie's page. She kept it locked, but she let me follow her, even put a photo of us up once. I click on her most recent photo, a shot of her with her hand on her chin, her face like she's clearly trying not to laugh, captioned, "Wondering if I can convince my team to run to Coney Island ice cream for free ice cream." View all 458 comments. I start scrolling. I can't believe I'm never going to see your smile again. Rest in peace, girl. I know God needed you, but I wish it wasn't so soon. I miss you and love you, Maggie. Seems like yesterday you were letting me borrow your Romeo and Juliet notes. R.I.P. XOXO. They're dedicating the rest of the season to you, beautiful. Anger suddenly flares in my chest. These people, they don't know Maggie, don't know her like I did. But here they are commenting on her posts and talking like they were all best friends. They're dedicating everything to her. Their grief gets to be public, and they get sympathy and free passes to the counselor's office, and I'm sitting here falling apart, and it won't change shit. I close the app. Before I can stop myself, I open Facebook, even though I rarely use it. Maggie and I were friends, but she only had a profile for her grandparents to see it, and I only had one for updates from a few people in Colorado. I go to her wall. It's almost worse here, the comments, because here are her parents, and here are older people from her church calling her an angel and talking about how she's up in heaven with her pretty white angel wings. Half the people posting have changed their profile pictures to themselves and Maggie, her face staring out at me from so many tiny circles. I can't look away. I switch back to Instagram, scroll back to the photo of us, taken together after her school's talent show that she helped manage. My arm is around her waist, both of us grinning. I'd been so nervous about her posting it, but girls do that all the time, that casual touching, arms linked or around waists or shoulders, and she wanted to post it. There are no comments on this photo, and I tap to leave one. What do I say? What can I say? I can't talk about how much she meant to me, or how much I love her, or how sometimes we would do homework together and I'd get so absorbed in my work she'd tease me about it and call me a nerd. How she hated her legs because they were too thick and muscular, but how I'd spend hours trailing my lips over them. How the knowledge she'd wait for me after a meet so we could go out for a private date was sometimes the only thing that kept me happy. How the first time we had sex, she was all I thought about the entire day. How we were both shy because it was the first time we'd really seen each other naked, but how even though we fumbled through it, I thought it was perfect. How even though she swore she couldn't sing, my favorite thing was to call her late at night and have her sing me to sleep. I miss her. She's gone and I miss her, and all I want to do is scream about how much I miss her and how much I love her, but I can't. I can't. I take a shower, come back and crawl into bed and scream into my pillow until my throat is raw and I can finally fall asleep. When I wake up, that photo of us is still there, the last thing open on my phone, that comment waiting for me. I say nothing.
Thank you, Nita. Oh, such a tough book.
Yeah.
You really are
Yep.
pulling the heartstrings.
It is a downer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not
And
the
not a
whole
total
book.
downer, but it's not, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's while the story is sad, the identity journey is really inspirational. And that's, you know, the part for me, that was the part of the book that made me cry a little bit, was the coming out story, and figuring out, you see Corinne figure out who she wants to be in the world, and letting more and more people in. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing. What do you hope that this book does for queer teens? I know that that's something that you feel really strongly about, and I hope you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, as a previous queer teen, yes. For me, with the point that I really wanted to get across that was very important to me for queer teens was that it is absolutely okay to not know what you want in high school, to not come out in high school, to not come out if that's not what you're comfortable with. But if you are comfortable with it, you that is something that you can do, that you have the option. Obviously, if you don't feel safe, or if it is safer for you to stay in the closet, then do that. But I really just wanted to hammer home, because I think a lot of times we do have this narrative of, if you're not out, you're not happy, you're not living your life to the fullest, or you're not, you know, being your like most authentic self or whatever. And you can still be that and still be in the closet if that is the right decision for you at the time. So I really wanted to get that across, and especially the fact that you don't have to know what you want to do when you're 17. Like, you don't have to have your life figured out, where you want to go to college, like what you identify as, what your labels are, because that is always an ever fluid and changing thing, and you don't have to have it figured out when you're in high school.
I think it's also a really powerful example of, at least for you, like writing as a means of self-discovery within the queer community. I've seen a pretty volatile Twitter conversation going on lately, with some folks talking about how, you know, own voices needs to be exclusively own voices. And I think that that is, you know, I can see the validity in that, but I think it's also important to recognize writing as a self-discovery process, and how not everybody necessarily knows all the parts of their identity and should be able to still write. Do you have any thoughts on that whole drama that's going on? Are you aware of it?
I'm absolutely aware of it. You can't book Twitter and not be aware of it.
Right. Sorry, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's just, I have a lot of feelings about it, especially, and for me, it's not something I've moved away from tweeting about my feelings on Twitter, as I feel like there's sometimes, for me at least, the inability to capture the nuance of what I'm feeling and the nuance of these discussions. I know Own Voices started as a really good hashtag by a disabled author, as to lift up voices that is someone writing about their own experience. And I think we have seen it shift in both good and bad ways. Good in that there is a push for that. We are seeing more and more of those books and more people writing about their own identities. Bad in that it does I feel like it makes marginalized authors feel like they have to come out to write a queer story, which is not necessarily true. That you can only write an Own Voices story, which is also not technically true. Who I Was With Her is only Own Voices for me in regards to bisexuality. Obviously, I don't identify as female. I am not a bisexual girl, so it's not a true Own Voices book. So in that sense, it's not easy to market under that label. And I do feel like we sometimes have this expectation, especially for queer authors, that you can only write Own Voices. It is, I think, a useful tool but I think it needs to stay a useful tool to find and uplift authors who are writing under the Own Voices label. I think when it is used to push back against authors, and obviously I'm only speaking from a queer experience right now, there's a whole other conversation that authors of color have been having about people who are not people of color writing characters who are people of color, and that's not a conversation I can speak to as a white person. But I think with regards to queerness especially, I think is fine. I think we just need to keep it as an uplifting thing rather than you're not an own voices author, so I'm going to leave very harassing comments about your personal life so you prove to me that you are queer enough to write the story that you're writing, which is very damaging, especially this expectation that authors owe you their personal lives at all, or
absolutely
owe you their sexuality or identity. So I have more feelings. We could go on for the rest of the night about my feelings about this topic.
Thank you. I'm sorry for, putting you on the spot. I just felt
totally
like,
fine.
It's a conversation that's happening right now. And I think you have a great take on it. And it's a conversation that obviously we're going to need to keep having because it's an important issue.
Yep.
All right. What are you reading right now and working on right now? Those are kind of the questions we're going to end on, and then maybe we'll open it up for some audience questions.
All right. Reading right now. So I'm reading, what am I reading? That's a great, I'm like, am I reading? I'm reading a couple of books for research for my next book, which I will get to in a hot minute. I'm reading, right now I'm listening to an audiobook, the third in the Trader Baru Cormorant series by Seth Dickinson, which is very good. So the third one is The Monster Baru Cormorant. Excellent audiobook, excellent book series. It's a queer political fantasy. It's honestly one of my favorite books. And I was very excited that the third book finally came out. So I've been listening to that. I've been reading that. I finished Grown by Tiffany Jackson, which actually also came out September 15th. And I read an early copy of that, and it absolutely blew me away. So if you also like contemporary, I would honestly recommend that book. I've been reading mainly that, and mainly just a lot of audiobooks, honestly.
Mm-hmm. And then what are you working on lately?
Ooh, secrets. Is my agent still in this chat?
Whatever you can share.
Am I allowed to talk about this? I think Eric left, but it's fine. I will talk as vaguely as I can. So I am working on another book. The way publishing secrets work is, I don't know when I will be able to announce said book, but I will say it is completely different from Who I Was With Her. It is similar in that it is still sad and still gay, but it's actually historical. So it's a completely different genre. Yep. Which is very fun for me. And that's why I'm having to read so many research books, which I did not. I don't know. And anyway, next time I say I'm going to write a historical, someone please tell me, Nita, don't do it, because it's more,
a lot of work.
It's more research it's more research. And for me, this will give you a hint to the book. It's research in another language. The book takes place in Germany. So a lot of my primary sources are in German. So I'm having to also read those, which it's been really fun. I'm very excited to eventually be able to talk about the book. And it's due theoretically to my publisher in January. So, hopefully I'll be able to talk about it.
Yeah, that's coming up.
Yeah, it is very soon.
I mean, no pressure. I know deadlines are stressful.
Nope.
All right. Well, we're really excited about that. Something to look forward to. In the meantime, your new book just came out. So everybody who hasn't read it absolutely should read it.
Yes.
And reminder that you can buy it from Flyleaf and get a personalization from Nita. They're coming back to Flyleaf this weekend to do some personalizations. So the link to that is right under our faces. Please buy with Flyleaf. We really appreciate it. All right, we're going to open it up to some audience questions. If you've got a question, you can drop it in the chat or in the Q&A at the bottom. It says ask a question. You can click that and type your question out, and I will go ahead and read those out to Nita. All right.
And I'm just kind of like scrolling through the chat after a while. My old English teacher, Howard, asked if Maggie's brother in the book, Dylan, is named after one of my old classmates. And to answer that, yes, he is. They are absolutely not the same. But I was like, I need a boy's name. Dylan it is.
It's so funny that you've named the characters after people you knew, but the personalities are not the same, because that's the exact opposite of what so many other writers do.
It's so I crib people's first and last names. Like my childhood best friend growing up, her name was Maggie. And I texted her and was like, can I please use your name? It's going to be for a dead character. Is that okay with you? And she was like, yep, that's totally fine. but like not the same last name, not the same personality. So I was like, I will steal this person's first name and this person's last name, and then maybe I will like put them together and get a character.
And it worked. And was your friend
did.
annoyed to be named after a dead person?
She was actually, I think, just happy to be in the book in any capacity. So
happy to be included.
Yeah,
We love that. All right. I'm going to read this question out from Craig. I think this book's theme is a great one to write about because all too often queer/non-heteronormative relationships aren't seen as real, strictly focusing on sexual elements, but one can't get much more real than the emotion of grief. Thank you for this work. Oh, I guess that's not a question, but
thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Do you want to comment at all on that? The idea that, you know, society expects queerness to be sexual in some way.
Yep. I also have feelings about that, especially because you get, like, again, there is a difference between writing for teenagers and writing for kids too. And I have friends who write for kids and they write queer books for children, specifically for like middle grade and stuff. And I think they, at least I've seen, get a lot more pushback because people associate queerness with sex, and it's like, oh, you can't talk to kids about being queer. And I'm like, you host A, gender reveal parties to begin with, and B, like, you put, like, I don't know, I'll see, like, I presume straight couples with like baby boys, and they're like, he'll talk to like a girl like his age who's like also 2, and they're like, oh, they're gonna get married, and I'm like, and you think you can't talk, like, you think you can't talk to kids about queerness, but you see a 2-year-old talk to another 2-year-old, and you're like, yes, they're going to marry. Like,
right.
So I thank you for the comment.
Yeah, we can get into all sorts of things, but let's move on to something else. Nell says, when you're writing something new and you hit a roadblock, how do you get past it?
Great question, Nell. I was gonna say I don't, but I clearly I do, because I have a book out. For me, sometimes if it's like a specific scene that I'm blocked on, I'll either skip over it and like make a little comment to myself and be like, this happens here, and then come back to it later, or I will sometimes I'll like try to write from a different perspective. So if I'm writing in first person, I'll switch to third person and write it that way, or write from another character perspective. Or honestly, sometimes I just change the font on my computer, and just having that different visual element really helps. So just sometimes I honestly, like, I'm like, okay, I'm blocked, I'll just put the document away for a day and go read or go like listen to music or watch like a movie or something that I find inspiring, and go back to it and see if that helped at all.
Right. That's interesting that you will change the from first to third person or back, because then do you have to end up going back and rewriting everything in a different perspective?
Yep. I mean, on one hand, it does create a little more work, but on the other hand, like,
it's worth it to get it out.
It's worth it I'd rather like go back and have to change it and actually have something to change than like sit and stare at my computer and not have anything to work on.
I think it's a great strategy. It's just interesting. I haven't heard it before. All right. Let's see. Somewhat related question. Speaking of roadblocks, any advice for writing during a pandemic?
Take it easy on yourself. We are all struggling in this pandemic. I think also having effects largely on mental health in ways that we aren't able to quantify right now, because we are in the middle of the pandemic, and we're going to look back and be like, oh my God, these are terrible effects on our mental health. So it's weird because on one hand, yes, being gentle with yourself, but on the other hand, for me, so I do have depression, I do have ADD, so routines are actually very helpful for me. So as far as writing during a pandemic, on one hand, I'm like, if I absolutely know I cannot write that day, I'm like, okay, I'm just absolutely not gonna write today. But on the other hand, if it's like, I can write, but I don't want to, making myself stick to that routine and be like, okay, if I set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes and write like what I can within that 5 or 10 minutes, and after that I can stop, just to like doing little things, because it still does add up.
Yeah, it's all about balance right now, I think, for a lot of things. All right, let's see. All right, we have a question from Connor. That's potential spoiler, but what's your favorite part of Who I Was with Her? You can answer as obliquely as you want.
That is honestly a good question. Honestly, I'm gonna say it's close to the passage that I read, because one of the things I really wanted to explore in the book was how people deal with grief over social media, and how grief is both like weirdly intensely private and also very public now with social media and with how people process it. So I'm proud of actually being able to have that in there and kind of have that Corinne go through like, oh, all these people are like, there are 400 comments on Maggie's Instagram talking about how people miss her, and it feels like that is how people process grief, but also to her it feels weirdly superficial. So I am actually very proud of being able to balance that kind of element within the book.
Yeah, it definitely feels very timely in a lot of ways.
It's so funny because when I was writing the book, it wasn't Instagram, it was Facebook, and I had to go back and like all the comments on Maggie's post were on her Facebook wall, and I had to, when I wrote it in 2015, and I had to go back and change that because teens today, even like millennials, don't really use Facebook. So I was like, I have to change this to a different social media.
Yeah, I guess that is a tricky element. It's like figuring out, okay, what's like the most current social media I can do, and hopefully it won't,
hopefully it won't feel dated.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Now it's out, so anybody can read it and say, well, it was 2020,
Right.
So
everything's dated eventually. It's fine.
Right, exactly. Here is a question from Leela. They say, congratulations. Do you have any tips for readers looking for books that represent them? It's so awesome that more authors are writing those kinds of stories.
So I actually think in that respect, yes, own voices is very helpful, because you're going to see someone who looks like you or has the same identity or same sexuality as you, and you can at least feel confident in, okay, this person is writing this story from their own experience, so this is something that like I will be able to share. So I think honestly that hashtag has been, I think if like there are several Goodreads lists with own voices works. As much as I don't like Goodreads as an author, it is actually very useful for being able to filter through. It's very dangerous for me, but it's very useful for being able to filter through and find books to read that reflect your own identity.
Yeah, and you can probably also Google own voices and then whatever identity you're looking to find in a book and get a list, just based on how many listicles there are in the world at this point. I bet there's one for almost everything.
Yeah.
Let's see. Tolu says, hi, first off, I love you. Second, I'm slowly getting into the habit of writing main characters like myself in terms of queer identity, but I feel like no one would actually want to read it. How do I get past this fear?
I would say, honestly, I would tell you to people are going to want to read it, because people are so hungry for different queer rep and different representation. There's never going to be enough representation to fill that gap for everybody. So I would say write it for yourself. There's an author I really admire named Courtney Summers, who is very like unapologetic about her own writing and herself on social media in general. So I always just try to channel that, at least, and telling myself people are going to want to read this. And if you tell yourself that enough, then it starts to at least feel a little bit true. And honestly, I mean, in the middle of that, if you write something you want to read, you have at least one person who wants to read it, even if that person is you. So you have an audience of one, but you have an audience, and just telling yourself that over and over, that this story is worth telling, is something that's really valuable.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anna Zabini says, will your secret, sad, and gay historical, and then exclamation points, will be structured in a non-linear way too?
So right now, no, but it will take place over several years. Is the outline right now, which Who I Was With Her did not do. So not nonlinear, but does take place over several years. I can tell you that.
Huh. Okay, you're giving us hints.
I'm giving you. You guys are not gonna be surprised when I announce this, honestly. Just gonna be spoiled in this video.
Oh, whatever. All right, let's see. Speaking to that second book project, now that you're writing another book, do you feel you have a set writing process, or does it differ per project?
So, a really great question. Thank you, Kirtia. Second, I think for me, my process kind of changed just with every book. I'm still trying to fully figure out what my process is, mostly because I will be candid on this video call. Book 2, the one that I'm working on now, is going to be the first full draft of a book that I have finished since I wrote Who I Was With Her in 2015. I have like 3 other abandoned projects that all got to about 17,000 words and then stopped. So I'm kind of having to reteach myself my process at this point and relearn my process, because when I wrote Who I Was With Her, I was just focused on writing it and I wasn't thinking about what my process was. And now that this has become my career, I'm like, oh, I should probably actually pay attention to what my writing process is. So I'm slowly trying to figure that out. Like, I know some things work for me, like setting a timer works for me, having an outline, even if it's like a vague, this person does this type of outline, works really well for me. We're going to see if having an external deadline really works for me, because now that I have to get the book done. So it's honestly for me just trying to figure out what my process is along the way. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get back to you after January with what my actual process is, and then I will have a better handle.
Yeah. Well, sort of speaking to that, in terms of process, do you feel, I know you just said writing this book, it didn't feel like you necessarily had a clear process, but there's this question from Connor is, what has writing this book taught you in terms of learning from your characters or your own writing process? So maybe you can answer the learning from your characters part of that question.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because now that I am having to figure out what my process is, I am actually looking back at how I wrote Who I Was With Her to kind of parse out, oh, maybe this is part of my process. So like the elements I mentioned before, like having an outline, setting a timer, and for me, trusting that I know how to do this, because I was getting frustrated the other day because I'm trying to come up with a title for my second book and nothing is sticking right now. I had a title, but I ended up changing it because it just wasn't working. And I was getting frustrated because I was like, man, Who I Was With Her is a great title, and why can't I just do that again? And then I remembered, oh, that actually was not the first title of this book. It did take me several times to come up with this title, and I did just forget that it had taken me so long to come up with a title for it. So just, I think for me, relearning like that I have a process, even if I haven't fully figured out what that process is yet. As far as what I've learned from my characters, I think what I've learned from Corinne is mainly that it's okay to be unsure about yourself. It's okay, honestly, for your labels to change, for your identity to change, and for that to shift. That was a big thing that writing this book really like reinforced to me, is that coming out is a never-ending process, which I did already know, but also that you can come out once as one label or one identity and then realize over time, oh, this isn't the label that fits me anymore. This is what I actually identify as. So
yeah, there's actually that's a great segue into this question from Jasper. Any thoughts on own voices with regard to fluidity of queer identities? Basically, how do you feel about writing about identities you may have occupied in the past but don't anymore?
That is a great question. That fits really well in this book too, because when I first started writing Who I Was With Her, I actually did identify as a cis girl. So I was like, I am a girl writing about a teenage girl. This is perfect. Like I mentioned earlier, I identify as non-binary now, because I did realize that fit me better. So I honestly think it's totally okay for queer authors to write shifting identities. I also wrote a lot of Julia's parts when I identified as ace, which is not my identity anymore either. Which is it's totally okay. So I think it's fine to write that and understand that those identities are shifting and evolving. I think that is sometimes one way in which the Own Voices label can box you in as a creator a little bit if you feel pressured to only write to your own queer identity. Just kind of, I don't know, keeping that in the back of your mind that yes, that is something that's fluid and shifts, and it is okay to write. There's no one queer experience either. So like, even if I wrote the most Own Voices book possible where the main character was essentially me, that is still not going to be someone else's experience of being non-binary. So
right,
it's totally okay.
And I think the conversation has shifted a lot in the past few years in terms of accepting fluidity in identities rather than, you know, coming out as the thing you've been all your life. But, you know, maybe humans change over time.
What a concept.
I know, right? All right, let's see. We have 2 more questions and then we're going to wrap up. Clara asks, what are some of your favorite underrated books?
Ooh, great question. In YA, there's a book. So a lot of people in YA are familiar with the author Melina Marchetta, who wrote Jellicoe Road. But she has another one called Saving Francesca, which is my favorite. It's not as well known as Jellicoe Road, but it's about this girl whose mother has depression, and she has to like find strength through her like group of friends who are all very diverse and like really, really well fleshed out characters. That's honestly one of my favorites that people don't talk about a lot. In terms of other underrated books, what was the name of it? If you guys will allow me to quickly Google the name of this book that I have totally forgotten.
Of course. It's relatable.
Honestly.
Authors are
right.
just like us.
Just like you. So it's A Sense of the Infinite by Hilary T. Smith, which is it came out in 2015. It's one of my favorites. It's about, if I am remembering correctly, and if I can pull up Goodreads, maybe not. If I remember, it was about this girl and her shifting friendships, and like it was a very quiet book about that high school experience, and just the writing in it was so gorgeous and totally blew me away. So definitely would recommend those 2. I'll actually put the titles for both of those in the chat so you guys can find them.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for doing that. And then we do have, I'll wait for you to.
All right, there we go.
And then we do have one final question from Alex. We know Alex well. Drafting or editing, which do you enjoy more? Or how do they differ for you?
Thank you, Alex. You should know this as my critique partner, but I do not like drafting. It is not my favorite thing. I much prefer editing. I much prefer already having the story down so I can fix it. I'm so sorry. I think actually you enjoy drafting, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I should know that. But no, drafting, not my favorite thing, because I don't know where the story is going. There's some like inherent fun for me in drafting, but I vastly prefer revising because I know what I have and I'm like, I can see the shape that the story is taking. And I'm like, yes, now I can go in and fix it and make it story shaped. With drafting, I'm like, I'm just throwing stuff at the wall and it might stick and it might not. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And editing is fun because it's like fine tuning, you know? The nebulous part is already done. And
exactly.
It's just the, like, you know, tightening up the screws. All right. So that was our last question. We are about to close out the event. So I'd just like to end with a few quick reminders. If you'd like to purchase books from Nita or Amber, even though she ended up having technical difficulties, that link is right beneath our faces. Remember to specify your personalization requests if you do order through Flyleaf. If you'd like to support the store, but either don't want to purchase a book or already have, and you'd like to donate, that link is at the bottom of the screen, and we really appreciate that. And if you missed part of the recording or you'd like to share it with a friend, it will be posted at this exact same link. As soon as we wrap up, it'll convert to a video that you can rewatch. And finally, please keep an eye out for other upcoming events by clicking our Crowdcast profile or signing up for our weekly newsletter. And you can just stay up to date with all things Flyleaf. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to our interpreter tonight, or interpreters. Thank you to Nita. Thank you to Amber for being around. I'm sorry we couldn't get you, but thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Bye, guys.